looking to take their cue from the American market. They want to see how our market does,
right,
and that will give them a follow-on. We have certainly got support from a lot of our allies. We've heard Tony Blair. We know that we're going to have support for them in trying to deal with this issue of terrorism.
It's in everybody's
globally.
interest to get together on this thing, because if they can do it here, they can do it anywhere, and I think everybody understands that. What do you think about
just a sidebar that I'll add to that, and that is that we have to remember that in the Gulf War, it was primarily Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates that paid the bill in the end.
Right.
They essentially paid, in fact, almost the entire bill. That's number one. Number two is that it is a very different cost that is involved when you go after an unseen, unknown, untested enemy whose financial infrastructure and military infrastructure is nothing close to what the Iraqi government had during the Gulf War. Just two sidebars that I would add.
All right. Larry Elder, we have one view of all of this going on because we're all here in New York City where it happened. How is the population dealing with this in California? What are you hearing from your listeners? What sense just what sense do you get from the people you talk to on your radio program each day of how they're feeling about all of this?
Well, what we're getting is an overwhelming sense of patriotism. If there's a silver lining to this crisis, it's that Americans are finally seeing that we have a lot more in common than we have apart. 2 weeks ago, some of the squabbles that we talked about seem so utterly petty right now. We're seeing people giving blood. The Red Cross saying that more people giving blood than they even need for the next near term. We're seeing a line of people wanting to join the military for the first time, an increase in that. We are seeing people volunteer their time to the point where Mayor Rudolph Giuliani says more volunteers are signing up than they can even put them to use. There's a tremendous outpouring here of affection for Americans, and what it really says, Jack, and and I think it addresses the other caller's concern about the economy. For the last 2 generations, 3 generations, we've embarked on a massive welfare state where the federal government has gotten involved in health care, Social Security, paying farmers not to grow crops, middle-class entitlements, where a lot of billionaire owners have somehow duped taxpayers across the country into ponying up money for stadiums that they ought to be paying for themselves. Meanwhile, we're shirking national security. The #1 job of government is to protect people and property, and hopefully now we'll get our priorities in line and have the federal government do its #1 job, which is to protect us, and let people, able-bodied people and able-minded people handle their own personal problems.
This could be an expensive, protracted war to prosecute if it comes to that. And I was looking at a couple of polls earlier, and I apologize, I don't recall which one. There are a lot of these around, but it was asking the question basically, do you support the United States going to war, and if necessary, would you support it if it takes a period of months? And the number of people in favor was somewhere up above north of 80%. The second question was, will you support military action on the part of this government over a period of years, if it's necessary? And the numbers go from north of 80 to just north of 60. Still a substantial majority. My question is, how much sense do you get of the willingness of people to make the tough sacrifices? There's no question during World War II that the sacrifices that people made at home, doing without gasoline and meat and all kinds of things in order to fund and fuel the war effort, made a great deal of difference in the economics of how World War II turned out. Do you have a sense that we're ready to go to the mattresses, as they talked about in The Godfather, to get this done?
Oh, absolutely. When you look at those images of those planes, the plane slamming into the World Trade Center, people are angry. We've got an enemy here, and there's no question that the American people are prepared to fight that enemy. But think about where the president was when this happened. He was in Florida reading to elementary school children. Again, a function that the federal government shouldn't have been involved in at all. Our own mayor of Los Angeles...
Wait a sec. I mean, politicians have been kissing babies since George Washington ran for office. It's just, photo ops are what they do.
Jack, here's my point. We have spent $135 billion just on Title I alone. That's a federal program that was designed to close the educational gap between inner-city school districts and suburban school districts. In fact, in the last 30 years, that gap has widened. The current Secretary, Ron Page, has said publicly that we have wasted $135 billion on this program. One more time, if you're going to talk about education, that's something that should be done by state governments and local authorities, not by the feds. The feds should be talking about protection. We should be talking about infiltration. We should be spending more money for spies and for spooks and for expanding the CIA and for protecting American citizens, not getting us involved in things that American citizens should be doing by themselves.
What's the market going to do tomorrow?
Oh, I have no idea what the market's going to do tomorrow. This is a case of first impression. But let's just not panic. If you are an investor in the market, you should be in on the long haul anyway. The way to make money in the market is not to panic, but to invest in corporations that have good assets, good earnings over a long period of time, and invest for the long haul. So I would urge investors not to panic and to ride it out. If you've invested your money in good companies, the fundamentals haven't altered just because of Tuesday.
All right, Steve in Idaho, what can we help you with, and what kind of week have you had?
Well, yeah, it's been a dandy. I think we need to focus on the positive things. You know, if every American, we could tell how the market's going to open tomorrow. If every American went out there and bought just a couple of shares of stock of their choice to show their support, it would tell a story, because this whole thing was to show that they could bring the economics of the world down, and the United States could show the picture with little cost to anybody of just how we support this country and what we're all about.
Did you have a question?
I didn't have a question other than
Right.
I
Don't
called.
have to have one.
I called earlier this evening to an investment person that I deal with on how we could get word out to people to go out and just purchase a couple shares of stock.
That's not a bad idea. They actually, on a related subject, the SEC has relaxed the rules for companies to buy their own stock, which would, I guess, serve to kind of put a floor under the market if it starts to go down, because as shares of these big companies that have a lot of cash in the bank, companies I'm thinking like Microsoft, General Electric, if their shares start to go down sharply tomorrow, they can step in and buy their own shares and, in effect, support their own stock, which would have, of course, an effect on the market overall. Yes?
Right. There are rules about that, and that is true. I think the SEC has tried to make those rules easier for corporations so that they can do it all day rather than during restricted hours. And I think that is important. And I think if corporations feel comfortable about buying their own shares, that sends a message to the investing public that these corporations feel good about their own business long term, despite the fact that the economy is not very strong at the moment. But I think it's very interesting to listen to a lot of this groundswell from individuals, some of whom may not even ever have invested before or have not been enormously invested, wanting to do this kind of thing. And the market is also a lot about psychology.
And
I think there's a way in which this can almost be a cathartic moment. We've spent a lot of time in the marketplace looking at these tiny, trivial bits of information and trying to extrapolate them long term, when we know that even if we are in a recession, it is not going to be for the long term. And to see now a much more important event be the overriding element that's driving people, and people saying, you know what, we support it, and maybe there is some good that comes out of all this, can really change the whole mindset that the market's been in.
The kind of thing he was talking about is not dissimilar to buying war bonds. I mean, it's a way to put money to work for the economy.
And the government will be issuing war bonds as well.
That's right. I heard that they're going to do that.
That will be another way that people can be involved.
I think there's another historical perspective that buttresses this groundswell that we're hearing from our callers, and that is that if you go back to 1987, when we had the first real crack in the global markets, and then you look at what happened when the Japanese market, the bubble burst.
Right.
And then the
Gulf War. What was the Nikkei at 40,000 or
exactly,
close?
37,000
when that
And then you had the incident with the
Gulf War.
Gulf War. And then you had communism collapse. And all of these things happened in rapid fire sequence. In each of those cases, you had something that went wrong with the economic infrastructure somewhere. Oil prices shot up, or there was a spike in interest rates at that point.
The senior President Bush during the Gulf War, as you suggested, was dealing with huge deficits. He didn't have a surplus that he could reach into to finance a war. He had to raise taxes, which politically may have cost him the next election.
And the difference this time is that you don't have any real structural or infrastructure problems in the economy. It may be a little bit weak. It may be, on the verge of teetering with, a couple of quarters of negative growth. But structurally, there's nothing wrong with our economy. And that is where the buttress comes with the kinds of comments that we've heard tonight. If you go out and buy 10 shares of your favorite stock tomorrow, all of a sudden the order imbalances that might be there at the opening disappear. That's what it comes down to.
Do you expect that the markets are going to come under pressure? The reason I keep asking that, the one thing the markets hate more than maybe anything else is uncertainty. And there is right now an awful lot of uncertainty, not just about the economy, but about where we're going and what we're doing and who we're going to fight, and if we declare war, who exactly are we going to declare war? I mean, the markets don't like that kind of tenuous, uncertain environment.
But there are two things that the market should really be comfortable about. Number one, the ability of the Federal Reserve of the United States and every other central bank in the world and every major economy to provide enormous liquidity at this moment is very different than we have seen in any other global crisis that we've been through, whether it was Saddam Hussein or 1987. The second thing is that the structure of the markets today, in terms of liquidity and safety and so forth, there really aren't very many other places where you can go and put your money to work. So let's say that you sell your stocks.
Right.
What precisely are you going to buy? 4% or 5% bonds?
Two-year Treasury notes are down under 3. Larry Elder, what about that? There's a little alternative to the stock market if you're looking for more than a very low single-digit return. That's one point. The other point is that there are tremendous amounts of foreign money invested in the American economy, particularly in things like Treasury bills, because the perception is the U.S. government is the safest financial institution on the face of the earth. Well, is there any risk with the circumstances we're talking about here tonight that foreign money would begin to be taken out of this country, and what would be the impact if that happened?
Well, I doubt that foreign money will be taken out, because the reason foreign money is here is because of our political stability and our economic progress. And you're absolutely right, markets do not like uncertainty, and in the short run you're going to have volatility. That's why prudent investment requires you to take the long haul. 5, 10, 15, 20-year investment windows ought to be one's horizon, and if that's how you look at it, you can ride out these shocks. In 1987, when the stock market crashed, the most prudent thing to do was to go back the next day and get into that market, because if you had done that, you would have made a substantial amount of return on your equity.
Absolutely right.
All right. We have a caller? We did. Lost him.
Scared him away.
We scared him away.
I think also the markets tomorrow are really going to look for liquidity, the ability of communications, that nothing's gone wrong. And all of these have been tested over the weekend, and they're expected to work fine. A number of firms that I've spoken to are going to be in their disaster recovery sites, which are in some places over the border in New Jersey and places like that. So a lot of the companies that have lost their headquarters will be in a position to be able to engage in business. And I think the marketplace will want to see that the marketplace is orderly and that transactions can take place on the floor of the exchange, that there is liquidity and that there is clearing. And I think that if that takes place, that will in itself will provide some calmness.
It's not only important that the markets get open, it's important that they operate correctly and efficiently for the trading session right up to the closing bell at 4 o'clock, and everybody can say, all right, the system's back and it works okay. Gregory in New Jersey, what kind of week have you had?
Well, first of all, I spent a couple days in Kansas City because my flight never made it to Seattle. We got grounded. However, the reason why I called was that I live here close to New York, and I see that they've got Americans have poured out a lot in donations, and they've got more than they need. And a lot of corporations have donated big bucks to
a couple of $100 million, I think, last time we looked. It's over $200 million.
Remember the Gulf War when Kuwait was being invaded by one of its neighbors, one of its brothers or cousins, you might say? We went over there and we bailed them out. We saved their country. We saved their people. Now the United States needs money. They're one of the richest countries in the world. Have they made any kind of indication that they would be contributing to some of the money? It's like payback time.
I don't know the answer to the question about money, but I do know this, that should military operations commence over in that part of the world, Kuwait has made available its real estate to American military personnel and equipment. So Kuwait would be used as a launching pad. I guess that's maybe not the best way to describe it. Larry, have you heard anything about any kind of foreign economic money donations coming in, particularly from the moderate Middle Eastern countries? I haven't heard anything about it.
No, I haven't heard anything, nor have I heard Colin Powell or anybody else even suggest that they wanted that. But Kuwait did take a full-page ad out in many of the nation's newspapers and express their sympathy and offer their support.
What about the potential shock to these markets on the price of oil? I'm not talking about tomorrow. Oil prices haven't really reacted that much yet. But depending on the kind of military operation we decide to prosecute, the world's oil fields are all around. And I just wonder potentially if the markets, they tend to be forward-looking mechanisms. Markets try to look out and sense what's coming. Would that be a factor that might weigh on the minds of investors tomorrow, that if the bullets and missiles start flying, oil prices, as they did the Persian Gulf War, they hit $41 a barrel very quickly? What about that?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a potential for oil prices to go up.